Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into a really fascinating and honestly kind of frustrating psychological trap that pretty much all of us fall into every single day. Have you ever noticed that the harder you try to force a thought or a feeling out of your head, the more aggressively it just shoves right back? It's a completely universal human experience, but the mechanics of why it happens? Absolutely mind-blowing. So let's jump right in and unpack the paradox of resistance. Now, this whole idea of resistance sounds super simple at first glance, right? But trust me, it gets deep incredibly fast. To really wrap our heads around it, we need to trace it back to the legendary psychiatrist Carl Jung. Now, he might not have phrased it like a catchy modern-day bumper sticker, but his core observation was totally spot on. He said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." And that right there perfectly captures the trap of denying our own internal struggles. Basically, the idea is that whatever you actively push away, deny, or fight against in your own mind, well, it's gonna keep showing up. And not only does it show up, but it usually comes back way stronger.
All right, let's get into section 1, the paradox of resistance and the pink elephant. So, the million-dollar question is, why does this growth happen? Why does pushing something away actually make it bigger? Well, it happens because the very act of resisting locks your attention, your focus, and all your vital energy right onto the exact thing you're trying to dodge. You're literally feeding it by fighting it. Let's do a quick real-time behavioral test to show you exactly what I mean. Read the prompt in front of you. Whatever you do not think about a pink elephant. Seriously, banish all imagery of a neon pink trunk-swinging mammal from your brain right now. Do not picture it. Well, what just happened? Exactly. Trying incredibly hard not to do something, whether that's not eating the cookie on the counter, not checking your phone every 5 seconds, or, not visualizing a pink elephant, it almost always backfires spectacularly. The act of resistance itself puts that object front and center in your mind.
And that brings us to section 2, leaking out sideways. Okay, so what happens when we take this exact same resistance and apply it to the heavy stuff? Difficult emotions like anger, jealousy, or intense fear. When we suppress a really strong feeling, it doesn't just magically go poof and vanish. It doesn't evaporate. Instead, as the author Alyce Dylan points out, it gets pushed underground. It starts operating completely off your radar, totally outside your conscious awareness. But it has to go somewhere, right? So it leaks out sideways. You might not actively feel that original anger, but suddenly you're dealing with unexplained irritability, or maybe a generalized humming anxiety that just won't quit. You might even start projecting your own hidden traits onto the people around you, basically pointing the finger at them for the exact things you're trying to suppress. Or it physically manifests in your body as chronic tension. You are essentially white-knuckling against your own mind, and these negative leaks are the price you pay. Moving right along to a really critical paradigm shift in section 3, awareness versus action. Now here is where things get a little tricky, and honestly, where a lot of people totally misinterpret Jung's advice. It's super easy to over-apply this paradox and just assume that any effort to change or any attempt to resist anything at all is doomed to fail. But actually, scratch that. That's a total myth. Resisting an action, like setting a firm boundary, saying no to a harmful urge, or consciously choosing not to act on a destructive impulse, is 100% healthy. You are absolutely allowed to stop yourself from doing something. However, resisting awareness, basically denying that the impulse even exists in the first place, that is where the trouble really starts. So just to be super clear, it's not the resistance to action that backfires on us. It is the resistance to awareness. The reality of human psychology is that you kind of have to identify what you don't want before you can successfully pivot away from it. The obstacle needs just a brief flash of attention to register in your brain as, okay, nope, not this. You have to acknowledge it so you can navigate around it. The real trouble, the persistent trap we get stuck in, starts when that quick flash of identification turns into chronic dwelling. So the actual skill we need to build here isn't just blindly saying, I'm never going to look at what I don't want. It's actually about managing the ratio and the duration of your attention. And let's see exactly how to master that ratio in section 4, the skier's secret. To really perfectly illustrate this idea of directed attention, let's look at a very visceral, physical metaphor that elite athletes use all the time. Picture a downhill skier absolutely flying at incredible speeds through a dense, highly dangerous forest. Where is that skier actually looking? I mean, if they fixate their eyes on the giant pine tree they're desperately trying to avoid, what do you think happens? Boom, they are inevitably going to steer right into it. In sports, and honestly in life too, The body just naturally follows where the eyes and the attention linger. And this brilliantly reveals the athlete's real secret. A ski coach is never going to tell you, don't see the tree. I mean, if you don't see the tree, you're for sure going to crash into it. Instead, the instruction is to glance at the obstacle, find the empty gap right next to it, and look there instead. You glance at the hazard just long enough to know its exact shape and location, but then, and this is the absolute game changer, you spend the vast majority of your precious attention on the alternative path, the empty space, the safe forward route.
Let's transition over to Section 5, retraining your attention.
Author Alyce Dylan dives incredibly deep into this in her book Alone in a Sea of Normal. She makes the case that your attention is a finite, highly trainable resource. So how do we actually, practically train ourselves to focus only on what we want? Well, Dylan breaks it down into 3 super clear, actionable steps. Step 1, see the problem, see the obstruction. Look at it with brutal clarity, almost like you're identifying a wildfire. You really need to understand its breadth, its depth, and exactly where it's heading. Step 2, if, after some completely honest reflection, you realize this is absolutely not what you want for yourself, for your loved ones, or your world, then you plot an alternative path. You explicitly identify what you do want instead. And then step 3, which is the most critical shift of all, pivot. You have to consciously decide that paying any more attention to the problem itself, beyond what you strictly needed to just understand it, is totally counterproductive. You got to pivot and focus the absolute majority of your attention on the solution. And that brings us to the core takeaway, the whole shebang of this entire explainer. Mentally rehearsing the wanted outcome trains the pathway you actually want reinforced. Think about it. If someone spends most of their day mentally rehearsing every single thing going wrong or everything they're desperately trying to avoid, well, that rehearsal literally becomes their practice. You just get better and better at generating that exact state of stress rather than escaping it. But when you pivot, you focus on the energy, the tone, and the quality of the life you do want to live, despite the obstacles, the elements, the arrangement, even the location of the life you're longing for. That is the infinitely more logical place to park your attention. If you can retrain your mind to handle any problem or impediment to your joy in this exact way, shifting from the obstacle right to the desired path, your road ahead is going to be filled with so much more adventure, love, and joy. Because at the end of the day, your attention literally is your life. So I want to wrap up this explainer by leaving you with a really powerful lingering question to chew on. What will you spend your precious attention on today? Are you going to stare at the tree, or are you going to look at the path? Thank you so much for joining me today, and hey, keep that focus forward.